In the dark heart of 1942, while the Wehrmacht's iron grip tightened across Europe, an unseen war unfolded. One fought not with tanks or artillery, but with radios, parachutes, and codewords. Deep inside occupied Holland, MI6 began a mission so secret that even its own agents knew little of its full purpose. It would come to be known as Operation North Pole, or in German, Englandspiel, the England game, a deception so deadly that it would haunt British intelligence for decades. The story began in London, in the crowded offices of the British Special Operations Executive, or SOE. Their task was simple in theory: set Europe ablaze, as Winston Churchill had commanded. Across the Channel, the Dutch resistance was in desperate need of coordination and supplies. Dozens of RAF pilots were being shot down over the Low Countries, hiding in barns and cellars, depending on sympathetic farmers for food. London needed eyes, ears, and hands on the ground, and quickly. MI6, working alongside the SOE, devised a plan. Dutch agents who had escaped to Britain after the German invasion of 1940 would be trained in espionage, sabotage, and radio communication. Once ready, they would be parachuted back into their homeland under the cover of night. Their mission: to build a network that could gather intelligence on German troop movements, locate airfields, and assist in the evacuation of downed Allied airmen. The first agents, equipped with B-2 suitcase radios, cyanide pills, and British uniforms hidden under civilian clothes, prepared to jump. Among them was Hub Lauwers, a young Dutch officer trained by the SOE's Station 17. His code name was Kick, and his signal, a string of letters and numbers, would be the voice of Holland to London. On the night of March 6, 1942, Lauwers and another agent boarded a Whitley bomber and leapt into the darkness near Utrecht. Their parachutes opened soundlessly against the moonlight, and as they landed in a field outside the city, they believed they were about to join a growing underground army. But what they didn't know was that German intelligence, the WWII, was already waiting. Unknown to MI6, the WWII had already broken several resistance networks in the Netherlands. Through brutal interrogations and cunning counterintelligence, they had captured earlier agents and seized their equipment, including radios. Instead of shutting them down, the Germans had a far more sinister idea. They would keep the radios on the air and impersonate the captured agents to mislead London. From the moment Lauwers sent his first transmission, something was wrong. His signal reached England successfully, but he had been forced to omit his personal security check, a prearranged code to verify that he was not transmitting under duress. London ignored the missing sign, assuming it was an oversight. It was the first of many fatal mistakes. As Lauwers built contacts among local resistance members, his every move was tracked. The WWII, led by Major Hermann Gisks, began to study MI6's methods with clinical precision. Within weeks, Gisks's team had captured more agents and obtained their codes, expanding their control of the network. Each time London sent new men or supplies, the Germans intercepted them, and the illusion of success grew stronger. A captured Dutch resistance courier later wrote in his secret notes, "The airdrops came like clockwork. We thought London had not forgotten us. We had no idea the enemy was listening on the same frequency." For MI6 in London, Operation North Pole seemed like a triumph. Reports flowed in describing resistance successes, new escape lines, and intelligence on German troop positions. In reality, every report was written in a German villa near The Hague, transmitted by WWII operators fluent in Dutch and English. The British handlers congratulated their agents, praising their bravery, and sent reinforcements directly into enemy hands. The human cost of those early months is difficult to measure. Dozens of brave Dutch and British agents jumped from RAF aircraft into waiting traps. Some were executed immediately, others sent to prisons like Mauthausen or Buchenwald, never to return. Yet back in London, the illusion persisted. MI6 analysts chalked up occasional losses to enemy efficiency or local betrayal. Few suspected that the entire network was compromised from the top down. One officer in the SOE, reviewing the strange pattern of captured agents, quietly wrote in his diary, "Either we are the unluckiest service in Europe, or someone is playing a game with us." That game was just beginning. By the end of 1942, MI6 would continue sending men and supplies into occupied Holland, believing the network was stronger than ever. The truth, that the Germans were running the entire operation, remained buried beneath layers of false reports and fabricated success. The shadow war in Holland had become a deadly illusion, and the British intelligence service, masters of deception in so many theaters, had themselves become the deceived. As snow began to fall over the Dutch countryside that winter, new agents prepared for their jumps, radios tuned to frequencies already compromised, unaware that the eyes of the WWII were fixed upon them. Their courage was real, but their mission had already been lost. By early 1943, the secret war in the Netherlands had turned into a deadly illusion. In London, MI6 analysts were convinced that their Dutch network, known internally as Contact Holland, was thriving. But in reality, the network had been hijacked by the WWII. The Germans called it Englandspiel, the England game. What began as a counterintelligence success was now an elaborate psychological trap, orchestrated by Major Hermann Gisks from his villa headquarters near The Hague. Each time London requested confirmation, the German operators, posing as captured agents, replied with perfectly forged messages. To maintain authenticity, they even included small errors, as if typed in haste or under duress. When London sent coded replies or instructions, Gisks and his team responded as though they were loyal operatives in the field. It was a cruel theater of war, one that depended entirely on trust, misdirection, and silence. Meanwhile, more men were sent from England to assist the growing resistance. Among them was Lieutenant John Abink, a young Dutchman trained at Soes Wanborough Manor. His jump into occupied Holland was flawless, his landing quiet. But within hours, he was in German custody. Like dozens before him, his radio and codebook were confiscated and added to the WWII's growing arsenal of deception tools. Soon, his radio began transmitting again. Only now, it spoke with the enemy's voice. One of the most chilling aspects of Englandspiel was its efficiency. Each captured radio became a tool of manipulation. The Germans learned to mimic the British tone, formal, crisp, coded with care. Their intercepted transmissions were retyped using authentic British-issue typewriters stolen from agents. It was nearly impossible to tell the difference. Even when small inconsistencies appeared, missing code checks or changes in transmission style, London's operators assumed the best. As one SOE officer later admitted, "We wanted so badly to believe that the line was still alive." By the spring of 1943, the deception had grown so sophisticated that MI6 sent larger airdrops of weapons, ammunition, and explosives, believing they were arming a massive Dutch uprising. In truth, those containers were being unloaded by German soldiers in Wehrmacht uniforms, laughing quietly as they catalogued every crate. Much of that captured equipment would later be displayed in propaganda photographs as evidence of British sabotage attempts. On the ground, the human toll grew unbearable. Dozens of brave Dutch and British agents were captured, interrogated, and executed without trial. Others vanished into concentration camps, their names erased from operational records. Some, under torture, revealed names and drop zones, believing their confessions would spare others. It only tightened the German net. In one rare surviving note, an imprisoned Dutch agent scrawled onto cigarette paper before his execution, "If anyone reads this, tell London the line is dead. Do not send more men. They are waiting for us before we even land." The message never reached England. Inside Gisks' villa, the atmosphere was one of calculated arrogance. Maps covered the walls, captured codebooks filled drawers, and in one corner, a British-made B-2 suitcase radio buzzed with a faint hum of transmission. The Germans would toast each successful deception with brandy, joking that they were running MI6 from Holland. But their discipline was relentless. No messages were sent without cross-verification, and every fake communication was carefully planned to maintain credibility. Yet cracks were beginning to show. Some British officers noticed the pattern of losses and missing security checks. A few suspected that the network might be compromised. But bureaucratic inertia and wartime pride made it difficult to act. To admit that the entire Dutch network was under enemy control would have meant acknowledging catastrophic failure. In one chilling exchange, an MI6 controller in London reportedly commented, "We've lost too many men in Holland, but the line still works. That's what matters." He could not have known that the line was a German one. By the summer of 1943, the scale of the deception was staggering. At least 54 British agents had been captured, along with 200 Dutch resistance members. Every one of them had been betrayed by the same invisible hand, the one they trusted most. Still, London continued to send coded encouragement, telling its men in the field to hold fast, that victory was coming soon. From his cell in Utrecht, one of the last real Dutch agents alive wrote a final note in the margin of a smuggled Bible. "We no longer know which voices belong to London, or which belong to the enemy. They all sound the same now." By the year's end, the England Spiel deception had become one of the most successful intelligence traps in history. The British believed they were winning the secret war. The Germans believed they were proving a point, that the Allies' faith in their own cleverness could be their undoing. In the cold radio rooms of The Hague, the WWII prepared the next stage, an even deeper manipulation designed not just to capture agents, but to shape Allied strategy itself. And in London, unaware of the scale of betrayal, MI6 prepared its next drop. Another agent, another radio, another silent descent into darkness. By early 1944, suspicion had begun to seep through the corridors of British intelligence. The losses in Holland were impossible to ignore. Every agent sent, every drop zone used, every operation plan seemed to vanish into thin air. Yet from The Hague, messages continued to arrive, calm, detailed, and reassuring. London wanted to believe its Dutch network was alive. But deep down, doubts were beginning to grow. At the heart of the deception was Major Herman Gisks, the WWII officer who had turned Holland into a vast stage for espionage theater. Gisks understood human psychology as well as he understood radio codes. He knew that London's faith in its agents was its greatest weakness. "You cannot trick the British," he once wrote to a colleague, "unless you let them think they are winning." For 2 years, he had done exactly that, feeding them a steady stream of partial truths, forged intelligence, and small victories. Inside MI6's Section 9, the department responsible for continental networks, analysts began quietly reviewing the case. A few brave voices warned that something was wrong. One of them was Leo Marx, the brilliant young cryptographer who oversaw many SOE codes. He noticed repeated violations of basic protocol, missing security checks, identical phrasing across different transmissions, and strange operational coincidences. Marx raised the alarm, but his warnings were dismissed. His superiors insisted the Dutch agents were under pressure and working under field improvisation. At the same time, the Dutch government in exile in London grew restless. Reports from scattered resistance groups inside the Netherlands conflicted with what MI6 claimed. Supply drops were missing, weapons caches were never found, and supposed safe houses were raided within days of new arrivals. Something didn't add up. Yet the machine of war, paperwork, planning, pride, kept turning. The Allies were preparing for D-Day, and the Dutch network was considered vital for intelligence on German troop positions and airfields. No one wanted to believe the foundation was rotten. On the ground, in occupied Holland, the few surviving members of the real resistance felt the tightening noose. Rumors spread that the Gestapo had infiltrated their ranks. Every new arrival from England brought danger rather than hope. The WWII used captured agents to write heartfelt letters to their friends in London, claiming minor successes and requesting more supplies. The deception was so elaborate that it even fooled some captured agents into thinking they were still helping the cause. One Dutch radio operator, interrogated but kept alive to maintain transmissions, later recalled, "They made me speak to London using my own voice. I told them I was safe. And in that moment, I knew I was killing others with my words." Inside occupied Holland, the Germans were playing chess with human lives. Every airdrop was staged. Every safe house was monitored. When new operatives parachuted in, WWII officers waited in the dark, capturing them before dawn. Still, the British believed the network was expanding. It was a masterpiece of deception, one that turned British efficiency against itself. By mid-1944, the deception began to unravel, not because of confession or discovery, but because of its own weight. Too many successful operations had no measurable results. Too many agents were out of contact for months. A few voices in London started to ask the forbidden question: what if the entire network is under German control? In one meeting, a senior SOE officer remarked grimly, "We have sent 50 men into Holland and not one has returned. How do you explain that and still call it success?" Yet bureaucracy and wartime secrecy meant little could be done. MI6 and SOE were rival organizations, often unwilling to share information or admit mistakes. Each assumed the other had made the errors. This lack of coordination only deepened the tragedy. It was not incompetence, it was institutional blindness. In The Hague, Major Gisks realized the trap was reaching its end. He had extracted every secret he could and now sought to close the operation with flair. He sent one final transmission to London, dripping with sarcasm and professionalism. "We regret to inform you that your agents are now our guests. Please stop sending more, as we have no more room." The message stunned London. Some refused to believe it was genuine. Others recognized it as the final proof of their defeat. MI6 immediately terminated all communications and halted agent drops into Holland. But by then, the damage was done. Dozens of agents were dead, hundreds of resistance members captured, and an entire intelligence network reduced to ashes. The discovery shook British intelligence to its core. Internal memos were classified, blame quietly reassigned. The press never heard a word. To the public, the story of the Netherlands remained one of bravery and resistance. The truth, that the entire operation had been manipulated from the start, was buried under official silence. A line from a Dutch resistance member's post-war letter summed it up best. "We were betrayed not by a man, but by a system that could not doubt itself." As 1944 wore on and Allied forces prepared to land in Normandy, the ghosts of England's Spiel lingered in the shadows. London would move on, but its lessons would echo through every intelligence operation to come. Trust must be earned, not assumed. In the fields and villages of Holland, the radios had fallen silent. The airwaves, once full of coded hope, were now empty. The game, the cruel, brilliant England game, had come to an end. But the mystery of how it had gone unnoticed for so long was only just beginning. In the summer of 1944, as Allied armies stormed the beaches of Normandy and advanced through France, a different kind of battle was being fought far from the front lines, a battle of secrets, deception, and redemption. For the men of British intelligence, the truth about the Netherlands operation was now impossible to deny. The entire MI6 network in occupied Holland had been under German control for nearly 2 years. Operation North Pole, England Spiel, was no longer a covert success story. It was a catastrophe. In London's secret offices on Baker Street, the air was thick with unease. Reports of captured agents, missing supply drops, and conflicting intelligence could no longer be explained away. Within the SOE and MI6, officers began to confront an unbearable truth. Their own messages, their own trust, had been weaponized by the enemy. A review board was assembled quietly, its task, to untangle how the deception had persisted for so long. One surviving field agent, interrogated after the war, later recalled how completely the Germans had mastered the illusion. "They even used our slang," he said. "They knew the tone, the timing, the little mistakes we made on purpose to sound human. We were talking to our killers and didn't know it." At the center of the enemy web was still Major Hermann Gisks, the WWII officer who had orchestrated every transmission from his villa near The Hague. By mid-1944, even as the German military began retreating on multiple fronts, Gisks continued to maintain his British radio network with methodical precision. Dozens of radios hummed in the candlelight, manned by German operators impersonating dead agents. They sent reports to London about sabotage successes, train derailments, and local uprisings, all of it fiction, crafted to maintain the illusion of control. The WWII's deception had practical goals too. Through false intelligence, they aimed to misdirect Allied air raids and slow the coordination between the Dutch resistance and advancing Allied forces. Each false message delayed real help reaching the underground networks that still fought for survival. But within British intelligence, something shifted. The silence of so many agents could no longer be dismissed. Newly decrypted intercepts from Bletchley Park hinted that German counterintelligence was boasting about an operation involving British fools. For the first time, senior figures began to connect the dots. What they discovered horrified them. Nearly every agent parachuted into Holland since 1942 had been captured or killed. The internal investigation revealed a pattern of neglect and arrogance. Messages missing personal security checks had been accepted as genuine. Analysts who raised suspicions were ignored or reassigned. There was no centralized system to verify field agents' identities across MI6 and SOE. It was a perfect storm of secrecy and bureaucracy, one that had allowed the Germans to play Britain at its own game. One British officer wrote later, bitterly, "We taught Europe how to deceive, and then forgot to teach ourselves how to doubt." While MI6 scrambled to contain the fallout, the Germans prepared their final act. In early 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the D-Day invasion, Gisk sent a mocking message to London announcing the closure of England's Spiel. It read in part, "To our English friends, thanks for the fine equipment and excellent agents. We hope to meet again after the war under happier circumstances." For MI6, the message was like a knife twisting in an open wound. Within hours, all transmissions from Holland were terminated. The operation was dead. But there was no celebration, only quiet grief. The scale of loss was staggering. 54 British agents captured, at least 50 executed, and hundreds of Dutch resistance members arrested. In one stroke, the entire intelligence structure in occupied Holland had been destroyed. Yet even in failure, small sparks of courage endured. A handful of Dutch resistance groups, operating independently of the British network, continued their work, sabotaging rail lines, hiding Jewish families, and relaying information through underground couriers. Their survival became a form of defiance against both occupiers and mistakes made in London. In the aftermath of England's Spiel's exposure, British intelligence began an internal reckoning. Training schools revised their security protocols. Radio operators were required to insert multiple authentication codes. MI6 tightened coordination with the SOE, and the lesson of Holland became mandatory reading for all future agents. Still, official silence remained absolute. No public admission was made. Families of the lost agents received simple telegrams, "Killed in action." No details, no explanation. The truth would remain buried for years, locked behind most secret classifications in MI6 archives. As the Allied advance liberated Holland later that year, the few surviving members of the Dutch resistance emerged from hiding. They found the wreckage of war scattered across their homeland, burned farms, ruined railways, and the echoes of voices once carried by radio through the night. Many asked why help had never come. Few ever received an answer. For the men and women of British intelligence, the failure of Operation North Pole became more than a scar. It was a haunting reminder of what happens when trust outpaces truth. They had believed their agents were heroes in the field, fighting unseen battles. In reality, they had been prisoners, used, manipulated, and silenced. And as London turned its gaze toward the coming victory in Europe, one question lingered in the smoke-filled offices of MI6. How many other networks, how many other successes, might still be illusions waiting to be exposed? The spring of 1945 brought with it both liberation and reckoning. As Allied forces swept into the Netherlands, the truth about what had happened to Britain's secret agents could no longer be denied. What MI6 had believed to be a thriving resistance network had, in reality, been a death trap, an illusion engineered by German counterintelligence and sustained by the very trust meant to win the war. But in the ashes of that betrayal, one last mystery remained. What had happened to the captured men and women who vanished during Operation North Pole? When the gates of German prisons and concentration camps were opened, investigators began the grim task of tracing the missing agents. Lists were compiled from scattered Abwehr documents and camp registries. The names painted a bleak picture. Lieutenant Hublauers, captured in 1942, miraculously survived. Others, like Johannes Abspiel, Marinus van der Giessen, and dozens of fellow Dutch operatives, had been executed at Mauthausen concentration camp. Some had no graves, their identities erased under false names. For the families of these men, missing presumed dead, was all the War Office could offer. Major Hermann Gisks, the architect of England's Spiel, was captured by Allied forces near the Bavarian Alps in May 1945. To the surprise of his interrogators, he seemed proud of his deception. "We respected our enemies," he told them, "but they made it too easy." His interrogation reports, later classified, revealed chilling details, precise records of captured agents, the radio frequencies they used, and even coded exchanges with London that were designed to prolong the illusion. He claimed that most of the prisoners had been treated according to military rules, a statement bitterly contradicted by survivors' testimonies. In London, the aftermath of the revelation was one of quiet shame. The British government chose not to publicize the details of the England Spiel disaster. To the public, the war had been won. The finer tragedies of intelligence work were best left untold. For the men and women of MI6 and the SOE, it was a painful silence. Some of the case officers who had authorized agent drops into Holland never spoke of it again. Others resigned in disgust, haunted by the faces of the men they had sent to their deaths. One internal memo dated late 1945, later declassified, read simply, "England's Spiel shall not be discussed publicly." The consequences for morale and trust in intelligence operations would be detrimental to post-war reconstruction. But in the Netherlands, the memory of betrayal could not be buried so easily. Families of resistance fighters demanded answers. The Dutch government in exile, now restored in The Hague, launched its own inquiry into the scale of the German deception. Investigators found warehouses filled with captured radios, false identity papers, and coded messages neatly labeled in German handwriting. Each one told a story of trust turned to tragedy. Meanwhile, former resistance members began recording their experiences for history. In those accounts, the pain of betrayal mingled with pride in their comrades' bravery. One survivor wrote in his diary, later published in Dutch archives, "We fought with what we had, and we believed in what London told us. But London was blind. Our faith was our strength, and our weakness." As Europe rebuilt from the ruins, Gisks' operation became a dark case study in counterintelligence. The irony was brutal. MI6 and SOE, masters of deception, had fallen victim to their own tactics. Their obsession with maintaining secrecy had allowed the Germans to exploit their isolation. England's Spiel was no mere mistake. It was the reflection of a dangerous assumption that control could exist without communication. By 1946, the Nuremberg trials were underway, but the England Spiel case remained mostly in the shadows. Gisks was never charged with war crimes. Instead, he was interrogated, briefly imprisoned, and eventually released. In a post-war interview, he was asked if he regretted deceiving so many. He replied coldly, "Regret is for those who lose." That statement would haunt British intelligence for decades. The men and women lost in the operation were eventually honored in silence. Their names appeared on small plaques in SOE memorials. No stories, no explanations, just initials and dates. Yet in the small Dutch towns where they had landed, their memory endured differently. Locals who had risked their lives to shelter them still told stories of the British drops and the coded radio messages whispered through the static. Even in failure, the courage of those agents remained sacred. They had fought not for recognition, but for freedom, knowing the odds were slim and the risks absolute. As post-war Europe settled into uneasy peace, MI6 and the SOE, soon to be dissolved, rewrote their operational doctrines. No longer would a radio transmission be trusted without multiple confirmations. No longer would agents work in isolation from resistance groups. The shadow of Operation North Pole would hang over British intelligence for generations. And yet, some questions remained unanswered. How early had London realized the truth? Were warnings deliberately ignored to protect larger secrets? Or was it simply human denial, the inability to believe that one's own brilliance had been outplayed? The answers, buried in sealed archives and whispered accounts, would remain hidden for years to come. The war was over, but the silence of the airwaves over Holland lingered, an invisible memorial to the agents who spoke into the dark, believing someone in London was still listening. In the years following World War II, the story of MI6's hidden operation in occupied Holland remained one of Britain's most guarded secrets. The code name Englandspiel, or the England game, barely appeared in public documents until the late 1950s, when fragments of the truth began to surface through Dutch journalists and surviving resistance members. Yet, even then, the full scope of the deception was veiled in bureaucratic silence, lost beneath the layers of national security and embarrassment. In 1953, Dutch author and war correspondent Louis de Jong began compiling evidence for what would later become the Netherlands' official wartime history. His research uncovered disturbing patterns, identical radio transmissions from multiple captured agents, matching ciphers reused across missions, and a suspicious lack of any safe extractions from Holland between 1942 and 1944. When he confronted former British officials, he was met with polite but firm denials. "You are chasing shadows," one retired MI6 officer told him. But de Jong was right. The shadows were real, and they concealed a story that had cost more than 50 lives. By the early 1960s, public pressure in both Britain and the Netherlands grew. Families of the missing agents wanted answers, and historians demanded transparency. Finally, a limited release of intelligence files confirmed the horrifying truth. MI6 had continued sending agents into the Netherlands long after suspicions of compromise had been raised. The internal investigation found that miscommunication, interdepartmental rivalry, and an over-reliance on coded signals had created a perfect storm of human error. London's insistence on radio discipline had blinded its officers to the warning signs that every transmission from Holland was under German control. One declassified report included the haunting line, "The Abwehr played the game with precision, and we, blindly confident, were the pieces." Even after the files were opened, many in the British establishment refused to publicly discuss the case. Some of the key figures involved had gone on to senior positions in post-war intelligence. Others were long deceased. MI6 itself, bound by its culture of secrecy, never issued an apology or formal statement. The tragedy was quietly absorbed into the organization's institutional memory, a lesson learned, but rarely spoken of. In contrast, the Netherlands treated the Englandspiel as both a national wound and a testament to courage. Annual memorials were held in towns like Ede, Velp, and Leersum, where resistance members had once helped British agents land under cover of night. Families placed candles beneath bronze plaques engraved with names: Lauwers, Smit, Abspiel, Poes, men who had risked everything for freedom, only to be betrayed by the system meant to protect them. Their stories became part of Dutch identity, reminders of the cost of both bravery and misplaced faith. Over time, historians pieced together the final acts of the operation. The Germans had kept meticulous ledgers, noting every captured agent, every intercepted drop, every falsified message. These records, preserved in the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz, revealed a chilling efficiency: an entire British network dismantled not by violence, but by deception. "It was warfare by trust," wrote one analyst. And trust, in war, can be deadlier than bullets. Modern intelligence experts continue to cite the Englandspiel as a cautionary tale. In an age defined by digital espionage and cyber warfare, the same lessons apply. Overconfidence, isolation, and a failure to question one's own assumptions can still lead to disaster. The ghosts of 1942 whisper reminders to today's operatives: verify, never assume. In 1974, long after the war's end, Herman Gisks, the man who orchestrated the deception, published his memoir, London Roughed Noordpool, London Calling North Pole. In it, he claimed he had waged a fair contest against British intelligence. His tone was chillingly detached, even proud. "We won by listening," he wrote. "They lost because they believed." To many, that single sentence summed up the entire tragedy. By the 1980s, as both nations healed and the old archives were finally unsealed, the full truth of MI6's hidden operation in occupied Holland emerged. There was no single act of treachery, no deliberate sacrifice, only the slow erosion of vigilance under the weight of war. The men who parachuted into Dutch fields in 1942 had done so with courage, hope, and faith in their commanders. That their courage was misused was not their failure, but the failure of an organization too confident in its own infallibility. Today, in the still forests of Gelderland and the quiet meadows near Wassenaar, Memorial stones mark the landing zones where the agents first touched Dutch soil. Locals tend to them each year, laying wreaths of red poppies and white lilies. The inscriptions are simple, but heavy with meaning. They came in silence, and silence remembers them still. The story of MI6's hidden operation in occupied Holland remains a somber reminder of the fragility of trust in wartime. It is not just a tale of spies and radios, of codes and betrayals. It is a human story, etched in fear, courage, and loss. The mystery of England's Spiel endures not because it is unsolved, but because its lessons are eternal. History, after all, does not forget those who believed too deeply.